The night of the gala, everything I thought I knew about family shattered in front of a room full of guests. I'm Emily Parker, a woman who spent years building a life on hard work and quiet strength, only to be scorned by the very people who were supposed to have my back. Their desperate pleas for help at that lavish event sparked a chaos that no one saw coming. What happens when the ones you trusted turn their backs, and you have to stand alone in the spotlight? Before we dive into the story, if you're enjoying these meaningful stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on more. Now, let's start the story together. I never thought asking for a little help would reveal just how invisible I really was to my own family. That morning, the sun peeked gently through the curtains of my modest kitchen in Seattle, filling the room with soft light and the comforting scent of freshly baked cinnamon rolls. It was early spring of 2015, and I stood there, nerves tightening my chest, ready to ask my parents for a loan, a simple $20,000 to open my first bakery storefront, a step towards something I had dreamed about for years. I carefully arranged a basket of pastries, the warmth still clinging to the cinnamon twists, the ones that always made my mother smile. The kitchen felt familiar and safe. Maple cabinets lining the walls, the worn countertop cluttered with recipe books and baking tools passed down through generations. But even in this place that should have felt like home, I sensed a growing distance, a silent divide that had been widening over time. When I finally gathered the courage to bring up my request, my father's response was swift and cold. "That's too risky, Emily," he said without hesitation. His eyes barely looked up from the newspaper he'd been reading. There was no room for negotiation or discussion, only a flat, definitive no. My mother, sitting quietly nearby, offered a soft, almost hollow reassurance. "You're doing fine, sweetheart." But those words felt more like a gentle dismissal than encouragement. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a smile as I nodded, trying not to let the sting of rejection show. What hurt more than the denial was the way they looked at me afterward, not with anger or disappointment, but with a sort of soft pity, like a parent comforting a child who had failed to make the team. It was as if my steady, reliable life running my small home bakery wasn't worth the same risk they were willing to take on my sister. Sarah, my younger sister, was always the one chasing the next big thing. Her voice danced with excitement every time she talked about her latest venture, a pop-up art cafe, a vegan bistro, or some other ambitious project. Our parents ate it up, encouraging her with smiles and support. And while I toiled quietly in my kitchen, barely noticed, Sarah was gifted extravagant presents, including a brand new car that shone brightly like a symbol of their belief in her. I watched the contrast in their eyes, the sparkle reserved for Sarah's chaotic energy, and the polite disinterest for my stable, measured progress. It was a silent message, louder than words could ever be. Steady work wasn't worthy of investment or faith. The weight of their refusal settled heavily on my shoulders as I locked up my kitchen that evening, hands still dusted with flour and cinnamon. I realized that sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with loud arguments, but in the quiet spaces where love and recognition are withheld. Why did my family refuse to see my steady work as something worthy of support? The question lingered, a cold whisper in the warm kitchen I called home. In this life, rough days can weigh you down, but there's always room for grace if we remember to care for each other. I clung to that thought as I prepared to navigate the long road ahead, determined to prove that strength isn't always loud. It can be steady, patient, and unyielding. It wasn't just the money. It was the silent betrayal buried in piles of paperwork I wasn't meant to see. That late autumn evening in 2017, Seattle was cloaked in a steady drizzle, the rain tapping softly against the window of my parents' cluttered living room. The room smelled faintly of aged paper and stale coffee, scattered with envelopes, bills, and tax documents that seemed to weigh heavier than their actual weight. I had come over to help my mother, Linda, organize the endless stacks of paperwork she had been avoiding for weeks. What I found instead changed everything. As I sifted through folders and envelopes, my fingers paused on a thick white envelope labeled refinance package in my father Robert's handwriting. Curiosity turned to disbelief as I pulled out the documents inside. They detailed a second mortgage on the family home, something I had never been told about. The house had been fully paid off years ago after my grandfather's passing. How could they risk everything for Sarah's failing businesses? When I confronted Mom quietly in the kitchen, her face flickered with unease, but her words were evasive. "It's just some paperwork, Emily. Don't worry yourself," she said, brushing off my questions. I wanted answers, but all I got were vague excuses and tight smiles that didn't reach her eyes. Meanwhile, Sarah's string of startups continued to unravel, each one promising, then failing spectacularly. Yet with every setback, family money and sympathy were poured in, cushioning her falls like an endless safety net. I watched her struggle with a mix of frustration and sadness. It wasn't that I begrudged her help, it was that I had never received the same trust or support. That night, sitting amid the dim glow of a lone lamp with rain rhythmically falling outside, a heavy weight settled in my chest. The truth was undeniable. My family's support was selective and conditional. It wasn't about fairness or belief in effort. It was favoritism, pure and simple. As I looked around the room at unopened letters and forgotten promises, the silent betrayal stung deeper than any harsh words ever could. What happens when you finally see your own family's true colors? When the foundation you trusted reveals cracks too wide to ignore? In this life, the hardest truths often come wrapped in quiet moments: the weight of papers, the whisper of rain, the absence of answers. And sometimes, recognizing those truths is the first step toward reclaiming your own strength. The invitation to the gala felt like a test I didn't want to take, but couldn't refuse. When the sleek envelope arrived, embossed with gold lettering and smelling faintly of lavender, I hesitated. It was an invitation to a high-profile family gala, an event where the wealthy and influential gathered beneath crystal chandeliers, dressed in their finest. It was set for fall 2022 in one of Seattle's grandest event halls, a place buzzing with the quiet murmur of softly dressed guests, the delicate clinking of glasses, and muted conversations filled with half-hidden intentions. As I stepped into the hall that evening, the air was thick with elegance and expectation. Velvet drapes framed towering windows, and floral arrangements filled the room with subtle scents. But beneath the polished smiles and polite laughter, I sensed a tension as palpable as the chill in the autumn air outside. Glances flickered like shadows, and whispered comments drifted across the room like smoke, reminders of fractured relationships and unspoken grievances. The Parkers, my family, moved with practiced ease among the guests, their smiles carefully measured. But beneath the facade, desperation simmered. Their fortunes had waned, and tonight they needed something only I could provide: my support, my approval, my forgiveness. They approached me with quiet pleas veiled in social niceties, hoping I'd forget past wounds and help restore their standing. Yet, the weight of years of favoritism, neglect, and silent betrayals bore down on me. Each clink of a champagne glass echoed louder than the music. Each polite nod carried the sting of past dismissals. The glamorous setting, with its glittering chandeliers and elegant guests, only highlighted the deep divides within our family. Tensions escalated as I found myself standing in the center of it all, the gaze of extended family and strangers alike focused on me. Their attempts at charm and subtle manipulation faltered under the weight of truth I was no longer willing to ignore. In a moment that felt both sudden and inevitable, I spoke, calling out their hypocrisy, their selective love, and the pain they had caused me. The room fell into a hush, the murmurs silenced by the bluntness of my words. Faces shifted, some shocked, others defensive. But none could deny the reckoning that had been set in motion. I had shattered the fragile illusion that had held us together for so long. As the evening wore on, the question lingered in the air. Would this confrontation heal old wounds or shatter what was left of our family ties? The glittering gala had exposed more than just the latest social event. It had laid bare the fractures in our family's foundation, leaving us to face the consequences. In life, sometimes the brightest lights reveal the darkest shadows, and beneath the sparkle of that night, I saw the raw, painful truth that could no longer be ignored. After the gala, the silence in our family spoke louder than any argument ever could. The grand event, with its shimmering lights and polite smiles, had passed, but what lingered was an uncomfortable quiet that settled over every interaction like a thick fog. Seattle's late 2022 chill crept into my cozy apartment as I sat by the window, watching rain trace lazy paths down the glass. The same quiet seemed to echo through the Parker family's smaller, quieter home, once filled with lively conversations and laughter, now marked by distant looks and unsaid words. Since that night, I had made a choice. When my parents reached out, hoping I'd extend another financial hand, I stood firm. I told them support came with boundaries and consequences followed decisions. They had to face reality. It was not cruelty, but a necessary protection for myself and for them. Sarah, who once burned bright with ambition, now struggled to find steady employment. The sparkle in her eyes dimmed, weighed down by repeated failures and the absence of the endless safety net she once took for granted. Linda, my mother, bore the weight of regret in quiet moments. She clung stubbornly to old habits and ways of thinking, perhaps as a shield against admitting her mistakes. I saw the conflict in her eyes, a mix of sorrow and resistance that made me ache for what could have been. But amidst it all, I found solace in Jessica, my closest friend and confidant. In our late-night talks over cups of warm chamomile tea, I confessed the ache and relief that came from standing my ground. Sometimes saying no was the kindest thing I could do, for myself and for those I loved. Family dinners, once a staple of our lives, grew less frequent and more awkward. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled with things better left unsaid. Each meal felt like a fragile truce, a careful dance of words chosen and withheld. The warmth that once defined those gatherings was replaced by a cautious distance, leaving me to wonder if we could ever truly heal. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, I looked directly at my parents and said, "Support isn't unconditional. You have to change. We all do." My words hung in the air, firm but not unkind. It was a turning point, a clear line drawn in the sand. They nodded, perhaps more out of exhaustion than agreement, but the message was sent. Still, a question lingered in my mind like a restless shadow. Would this be the moment our family learned to grow, or would old patterns pull us back into the same cycle of disappointment? The answer remained uncertain, as fragile as the bonds we were trying to mend. In life, growth often demands difficult truths and the courage to face them. And sometimes, the most profound healing begins in the quiet spaces between words and gestures. Sometimes the toughest decision is knowing when to close the door and not look back. Early in 2024, the crisp Seattle air carried a sense of finality as I sat behind the counter of my bustling bakery, watching customers come and go. The scent of fresh bread and cinnamon filled the room, a comforting reminder of how far I'd come. But beyond the warm walls of my shop, another chapter in my life was quietly closing. I had sent the message that would seal our family's new chapter. It was simple but firm. I would not be renewing the lease on the small apartment I had rented for my family. This wasn't a punishment. It was a boundary I had to set to protect my own peace. Years of carrying their burdens, of watching them rely on me without real change, had taken their toll. It was time for them to stand on their own. Sarah left quietly, moving out with little fanfare. She had found a modest job managing inventory at a local warehouse, a far cry from the grand dreams she once chased. But it was honest work. I could see the weight of her past failures fading, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild. Linda and Robert, my parents, downsized as well, finding a smaller place nearby and settling into a humbler lifestyle. The grand family dinners were gone, replaced by simpler routines and quieter evenings. As I reflected on this bittersweet separation, I realized how much growth it had required from all of us. Setting boundaries wasn't easy, but it brought a peace that had long eluded me. I had learned that self-respect sometimes means saying no, even when it hurts. It means loving from a distance and trusting that others can find their own way. What does the future hold for a family rebuilt on new terms? Only time will tell. But for now, I am at peace with the strength I have found in standing firm, knowing that sometimes the greatest love is knowing when to let go. I once thought family meant standing together, but I learned it's about standing for yourself. In the late days of 2024, my bakery in Seattle buzzed with life, warm lights spilling through the windows and the rich aroma of fresh bread greeting every customer. This place was more than a business. It was the solid foundation I had built not only for my livelihood, but for my soul. The years of struggle, silence, and setting boundaries had shaped me into someone who understood the true meaning of strength. My bakery flourished, a quiet testament to patience and resilience. Though contact with my family was occasional now, it was on my terms, measured, cautious, but hopeful. I often reflected on the journey that brought me here. The pain of feeling unseen and unsupported had given way to a deep gratitude for the strength I found within myself. I learned that sometimes love means protecting your peace, even if it means stepping away. I left an open door for reconciliation, clear boundaries marking the path forward. It was a delicate balance, hope intertwined with realism. My quiet triumph stood in contrast to the wounds of the past, a gentle victory born from hardship. As I looked toward the future, I knew it awaited with respect and self-love at its core. In life, true family is not just about standing side by side, but standing for who you are, with courage and grace. As I stand in my bakery, surrounded by the comforting aroma of fresh bread and the quiet hum of daily life, I am reminded that family is not just about standing side by side, but about honoring each other's journeys, even when those paths diverge. Life teaches us that love grows strongest where there is respect, patience, and understanding. If we learn to listen with open hearts and give space for healing, even the deepest wounds can find hope. If this story touched you in some way, I invite you to share your thoughts or memories. Together, we can celebrate the enduring strength found in family, forgiveness, and the courage to stand for ourselves.